Murphysboro, Illinois is known for its small-town charm, as well as its rich history. Located on the southern border of Illinois, this town was built on coal and agriculture. The town was familiar with fear, as it had already faced one of the deadliest tornadoes in United States history, killing nearly 250 people. Yet, in 1973, this small town spent nearly 2 weeks facing an undefinable threat, the horrors of which they couldn't even imagine. This menace was known as the Murphysboro Mud Monster.
Around midnight on June 25th, 1973, a young couple, Randy Needham and Judy Johnson, had a strange experience overlooking the big muddy river. They were parked near the town's old boat ramp, spending some time together and listening to the radio when they heard something that chilled them to their core.
Doesn't this sound like the beginning of every American urban legend story or horror film you've ever seen, Jess?
Exactly.
When are teenagers going to learn that they can't just park in the middle of nowhere and make out?
Probably never.
The encounter that Randy and Judy had started with a ferocious scream. That they both described as being similar to an amplified eagle screech. Not knowing what the sound was, Randy quickly turned off the radio and visually searched the brush around the car. Then came another scream. But to their horror, this time it seemed to be coming from the brush in front of the car. What they saw next paralyzed them with fear. Slowly, a putrid-smelling creature ambled towards them. A creature that both Randy and Judy described as an oversized gorilla, almost 8 feet tall, with white hair covered in mud.
Randy started the car and sped away. But the pair faced a burdensome dilemma. They could go home and pretend this never happened, or go to the authorities and report the incident. If they chose to report the incident, they would face severe consequences from Judy's parents, who had forbidden the couple to see each other. After discussing the situation, both chose to protect public safety at the expense of their own reputation and report what they saw.
The pair went straight to the police station and reported the incident to Police Chief Ron Manwaring, who believed the young couple. He knew that they had nothing to gain from exposing their secret romance. They were obviously alarmed and gave credible descriptions of the creature. 2 officers were sent by Manwaring to check out the situation. They were understandably skeptical, but obeyed orders and went with Randy to investigate the situation. The officers were Jimmy Nash and Merrill Lindsay. They found plenty of unusual tracks in the mud around the boat ramp, tracks that were 10 to 12 inches long and several inches wide.
While investigating the tracks, the creature screamed again. The screech alarmed Officer Nash so much that he ran away, dropping his gun in haste. He claimed that the howl was the most horrifying sound that he'd ever heard. He was familiar with the local wildlife and said that the sound wasn't even close to local predators, such as screech owls or bobcats. This was unlike anything he had ever heard before. Defeated, the officers went back to the police station and reported what they had found.
2 hours later, on the 26th at 2 a.m., Officers Lindsay and Nash went back to the muddy dock area with a 3rd officer, Bob Scott, and Randy. They searched the scene again and found more tracks. As Lindsay went to retrieve his gun, the creature screamed again. Startled, all 4 men ran from the scene and regrouped at the patrol car. After regrouping, they decided to return once again to the river. This time, they heard a splashing sound coming from the shallow water. The splashing seemed to be coming from a large animal, but they were never able to get a visual on the creature.
Would this be the end of the mysterious mud monster? Would the creature evaporate away with the night's humidity? Unfortunately, no. Later that same day, at 10:30 in the evening, there was another encounter. This time, Christian Barrel, a local 5-year-old, was playing in his backyard near the big, muddy river. He was catching lightning bugs and stuffing them into a jar. He stopped when he was surprised by something large and white behind his neighbor's fence. He dropped his jar and ran inside yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, there's a big ghost in the backyard." His father obviously doubted the boy's tale until talking to the neighbor who validated the story.
The neighbor, Cheryl Ray, was in her backyard with her friend Randy Creeth. They were stargazing when they heard a strange rustling sound come from the bushes not far from the porch. They thought it was likely some neighborhood kids trying to spy on them, so Cheryl quickly went inside to turn the porch light on to scare them away. Randy ran out to check the area and to catch the spying youngsters. He stopped, shocked at what he saw. He called Cheryl to come quickly and look. Randy recounted, "The thing I remember was the bulk of it, the shape, the human form, and the stench of the river slime it apparently had on it. It was about 8 feet tall and at least as stocky as a New York football player. We were within 15 feet of it, close enough to see the body, the texture of the fur, long and hairy, like an English sheepdog."
Randy drew a sketch of what he saw that night. The sketch was of a large hominid creature with a spade-shaped head. He described the creature as being 8 feet tall and at least 350 pounds, and had long, gorilla-like arms. He said that the creature just stood there and stared at them for what seemed like an eternity, but was actually probably only about 30 seconds.
Cheryl gave her own description of the beast. She said,
"It was real tall, hairy. I think it was white, but it was dirty, matted. It had a real bad odor. It was really rank. I never smelled anything like it. It seemed like an eternity we just stood there. And then it just turned around and walked off into the woods. We could hear it trampling through the woods."
Both Randy and Cheryl were adamant that the creature had glowing red eyes. Some speculated that given the white hair and the red eyes, this particular creature might have been an albino. But Randy and Cheryl were adamant that the glowing eyes were not eye shine, but in fact illuminated.
The Murphysboro Police Department was called again, and officers Nash and Manwaring reported bravely to the scene. Tracks were again discovered, which convinced the chief to send all 14 of the city's police officers to the scene. They were accompanied by Reb, a trained and seasoned police dog, and his handler, Jerry Nellis, from the Carbondale Police Department. The men, equipped with rifles and flashlights, descended on the area. They found a foul-smelling black slime trail near the Ray family's back porch. Reb caught a scent and quickly took off after the mysterious animal. The path and Reb took the officers through a maze of broken tree limbs, flattened underbrush, and down a steep embankment toward a small pond, where they were forced to stop by a thicket of underbrush. After investigating a little, Reb found the scent again, and eventually led the posse to a deserted barn on the nearby Bullar property. At the barn, Reb just stopped. The usually daring and adventurous dog refused to move into the barn and just laid there, trembling and yelping in fear.
Reb's unusual behavior spooked the officers so much that they radioed for help from a neighboring police department. They responded by sending in a dozen patrol cars as backup. The officers breached the barn, but no creature was found. Had it escaped, or had it never been there? Frustrated, disappointed, and empty-handed, the officers left for the night.
Over the next week, dozens of citizens armed themselves into civilian posses as reports of the mud monster continued to roll in. The next major sighting occurred 10 days later, when 3 carnival workers had a frightening experience. The carnival had come to Murphysboro for the 4th of July and had set up in Riverside Park, near the area of the first encounter. On July 7th, Otis Norris, Ray Atkinson, and Wesley Lavender were conversing behind one of the carnival trucks at around 2 in the morning when they heard a strange noise. Some of the Shetland ponies tied to the bramble on the other side of their truck began to whinny and whine.
The ponies were well trained to be especially docile, so their unease bothered the 3 men, and they went to check on them. The animals, usually calm, seemed panicked were vocalizing loudly and were rolling their eyes. They were all pulling against their leads in an effort to escape. Looking around, the men spotted the reason for the terror. All 3 men reported seeing a strange, 8-foot-tall, 400-pound beast covered in so much hair that it was impossible to distinguish any facial features. What were the men to do other than run for help? The men gathered several other carnival workers, who all came quickly to the scene. The monster was still there, lurking. Charles Kimball, one of the workers, said the creature just stood there, looking at the ponies with a curious pose, with its head cocked to the side, before walking off.
As the night continued, there were other signs of the mysterious beast. Nedra Green, who lived on a rural farm in Murphysboro, reported that she heard a screaming wail coming from a shed near her property. Wisely, she chose not to investigate. Another report came from 2 men that claimed to see a big, muddy monster near a pond north of Murphysboro.
By this time, the town was in an uproar, and armed posses began combing the Riverside Park area. The police were obviously concerned because they didn't want people accidentally getting shot, protecting themselves from their worst nightmare, or trying to collect one of the bounties that private entities had offered up to capture the monster. The bounty quickly rose to $2.5 million. This certainly exacerbated the situation as people took to the woods with weapons, food, and helicopters in an attempt to lure the supposed creature into cages and to transport it to a local zoo.
Newspaper editor Tony Stevens wrote, "This is no hoax. This is hunting country. Anyone who goes around in an animal costume is going to get his butt shot off."
After all the build-up, the hunt for the elusive beast met with a rather undramatic end, as the mob of searchers likely ran the beast off. There were a few final reports of guttural wails, large tracks, and trees pulled completely out of the ground, but all in all, there were no more glimpses of the mud-encrusted giant.
Later, newspapers picked up the story, and the story even made it to the New York Times. Loren Coleman, the famed cryptozoologist, investigated the stories and formulated a hypothesis that the beast was possibly a Bigfoot-type creature. This creature, however, seemed to be somewhat distinct, as it never really seemed to be aggressive, as West Coast Bigfoots were often reported to be. Could this mean that there is a new Bigfoot species now roaming the Midwest?
In the preceding years, occasional monster reports have continued to trickle in, but there has never been another frenzy of sightings like the ones in 1973. So what was the Murphysboro mud monster? Whatever it was, the occurrences in Murphysboro in the summer of 1973 are still a mystery. Perhaps one of the police officers said it best when he said, "A lot of things in life are unexplained, and this is another one. We don't know what the creature is, but we do believe what these people saw was real." Could the monster still be around, lurking in the mud on the banks of the Big Muddy River? Perhaps. So next time you're traveling through southern Illinois and you're near Murphysboro, make sure you keep an eye out for Big Muddy.